This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include former state senator, former chair of the State Board of Education, Howard Lee, syndicated columnist, John Hood, and author, by the way, NC Policy Watch's Chris Fitzsimon, and hectic political campaign consultant Doug Raymond. Well, there's a lot to talk about this week. We're going to begin by examining the economic forecast and how predicted income growth isn't being felt all over our state. We'll talk about a report on charter schools that Lieutenant Governor Dan Forrest stopped from being approved, and we'll look at increased but insufficient transportation funding. Let's get started. In the early weeks of every new year, we can expect chambers of commerce, bankers, and economists to make economic predictions for the year. This year was no exception, and we want to share the consensus we heard. North Carolina added jobs at a faster rate in the closing months of 2015 than many had predicted, and the forecast is for continued job growth. But there's real concern about growth in wages and dramatic proof that much of the economic improvement is taking place in urban and ex-urban regions, further dampening the state's economic outlook for rural counties. An economic development consultant reported to a legislative committee that only 5 of our 100 counties have average incomes above the state average. They include Wake, Durham, Forsyth, and Mecklenburg County. John Hood, Senator Floyd McKissick of Durham asked the consultant in the legislative meeting, what could be done to reverse the trend of talent and jobs leaving these rural counties? And the answer he got was that the smaller rural counties need to align themselves and be linked to urban counties. Just how practical and impossible is that to accomplish?
Well, it depends on how close your rural county is to the urban county. If you're fairly close by, I mean, I was looking at commuting patterns recently, and it's surprising if you look at it how many thousands of people commute from 2 counties away, sometimes 3 counties away, to come into a job center. That is a viable strategy, particularly as we build out and refurbish our road system, and there are some other infrastructure implications of that. But when you go into the far-flung areas, simply saying, well, maybe people will live here and drive an hour and a half is not a viable strategy, and obviously you have to bring things to that area. Now, there are people who I've talked to who are very optimistic about certain kinds of development in rural areas, things like assisted living facilities and areas that are attractive places to live because people want that continuum of care as they get older, taking advantage of natural resources or recreational amenities that exist. But let's keep this in mind that North Carolina has always had differences in growth rates between urban and rural areas. So does North Dakota, so does New York, so does every state. So this is not a unique problem.
But Howard Lee, what does it say about a state when only 5 of our 100 counties have average incomes above the state income average?
Well, that certainly speaks to the fact that we have a challenge we need to try and meet. And we've been talking about this now for 50 years, at least since I've been here. When I ran for Lieutenant Governor in 1976, I was talking about how we needed to enhance our rural counties. I've often thought that one option might be to follow what John just said in terms of finding the kind of job sources that could be placed in these counties. I was looking at TV last night and on the report on solar, and I'm thinking, you know, here is an industry that certainly, if the state were to take the leadership, could possibly be a source of jobs in many of these rural counties. But then finally, I'd like to see rural counties create coalitions, and several rural counties come together, pool their resources, and build a business park.
But Chris, help me with the math here. You're good with math. How does this work? If you've only got 5 counties that are above the average income, what does that say about the rest of these counties? I mean, how does the math work out here?
Well, most of the people in North Carolina live in these counties, and if the median wage in Wake County and Mecklenburg County and Durham County, and with RTP and the universities and the financial sector, I mean, if you really think it through, it sort of makes sense. That doesn't solve the problem that we're trying to figure out how to solve. But it isn't a shock, and it has been going on a long time. I think John is on to something in terms of you obviously have to use the things you have. Some of those counties are along the coast, some of those are on the inner coast, some of those are on their mountains. where tourism still needs to be explored. I do think it calls for making sure we're making the proper investments in education and community, in public schools and community colleges and other things that spawn jobs that help people in the local communities, and I'm not sure we've been doing that as much as we need to.
Doug, it's always been the case that governors and legislatures take credit when the economy is growing and doing well, and conversely take the blame when it isn't. Did our elected officials really have that much to do with the improved economy in North Carolina in 2015?
Well, see, I'm one of those crazy people that still believe in that old thing called the business cycle, and there's a natural cycle, and the only difference is how long it takes between each cycle. And
in North Carolina, it's about 8 to 10 years between cycles.
Exactly. But when we look at the question you've posed here, there's a couple things that come to mind. Number one, in these bigger areas, the cost of living is greater. So someone maybe doing the exact job in Charlotte that they could do in a rural area is going to have more money to be able to afford to live. And the other thing is, I don't know if it's a sense of entitlement, but there's a trade-off. If you want to live someplace where you don't have to hear your neighbors, what they're watching on TV next to you, and you have a little space, there's a trade-off. You're not going to have a high-paying job just 10 minutes down the road. So you make choices where you live, and I don't think that there's anything wrong that some of our counties may not have high-paying jobs, because there's some other quality of life issues in those counties that offset that.
I think Doug is onto something here. But John, what can we attribute the fact that the growth, particularly in the last quarter, was stronger than many had predicted?
The predictions were bad, and they're unnecessarily pessimistic, and this has been going on for several years. People will predict certain bad news. It doesn't come to pass. They kind of say, oh, never mind. The next 6 months are going to be awful. I've been very optimistic about the state's economy, pointing out that the actual numbers show North Carolina surpasses the national and regional averages in almost every category, and has been doing so for several years. That having been said, I'm now getting increasingly nervous about the possibility of dipping back into recession. I don't mean North Carolina, I mean the nation and the world. National and international trends are the major story, but obviously we're going to be affected by them.
I was listening to what these economists said, Chris, and I was also listening to what they didn't say. And what they said was they expected continued growth. I didn't hear any of them saying they thought North Carolina was going to have a breakout year in 2016. Did you?
No, but I mean, I think steady growth would be welcome after, to Doug's point about the business cycle, to make this last as long as it can. But, we talk on the show, we talked for years, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, we sat on the show and talked about state policies have some impact, but this is largely a national, international phenomenon. The national economy, depending on how you look at it, has created a lot of jobs. There's still a lot of people who aren't in the labor force, although more than their percentage than there is in North Carolina. But this really is a cycle. State policies can have some impact, but it's a national and international climate that we have to operate in.
Doug, when we look at this business about jobs, employers have been saying now for several years they have jobs to offer, but the employees don't have the job skills that they need. I think it's interesting that the Emerging Issues Forum, which is going to take place the first week in February, is going to be talking about future work. Do you expect that from that and from other discussions we can expect to see an increased emphasis on job training and job retraining?
I would hope so. I mean, the education is the key to that, but you have to get real, so to speak, with it and say, yes, there are high-paying jobs out there, that there are certain education needs, but we also there's a lot of people that kids are just not coming out of high school with the basic skills needed to have entry-level jobs that will lead to very good jobs in a couple years. So we got to get rid of this thing that everybody in high school is going to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, and realize that there's a balance to be had. And
Howard, you've been saying that for years.
Absolutely. I was in conversation yesterday with a person whose son had graduated from college, who had a computer science degree, and who wants to teach, but got offered a very high-paying job with Red Hat. And guess what choice he made? I think if
So he's wearing the red hat.
He's wearing the red hat. And I was listening to Asa Hutchinson, who's governor of Arkansas, talking about how he's mandating computer science at high schools so that these kids can have the skills that the market is calling for. I think we really do have to take a closer look at what we're emphasizing in school and be able to enhance kids' skills so that the jobs that are out there, they can take advantage of.
Match the skills that our kids have. Well, we thank you for watching NC Spin on the air or on YouTube. Here's a reminder, there's much more on our website, ncspin.com or NC Spin on Facebook. You'll find video footage not seen anywhere else, perspective pieces from our panel, and my weekly column. Get more balanced debate from the Old North State on ncspin.com, NC Spin on Facebook, or you can follow us at NC Spin Tweets. After these messages, we're going to talk about those charter schools.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
I still believe in the Constitution. That's why I back Buck.
I believe in the Second Amendment. That's why I back Buck.
I want someone who puts North Carolina first. That's why I back Buck.
In the upcoming Republican primary, back Buck. Buck Newton for Attorney General.
How can North Carolina prepare today to create enough good jobs tomorrow? Join business, policy, and education leaders at the 31st Annual Emerging Issues Forum, Future Work for Answers. February 8th and 9th in Raleigh. Help drive the future of work by registering today at emergingissues.org.
Phones are getting smarter, cars more efficient, TVs bigger and more stunning. Imagine the same innovation from agriculture. Meet the Plant Sciences Initiative at NC State, a proposed state-of-the-art research complex where world-class researchers will tackle agriculture's toughest challenges, like feeding the world's rapidly growing population while preserving natural resources for future generations. Join Farm Bureau and NC State in moving North Carolina to the forefront of ag research in the world. Visit keepaggrowing.org.
Hey everyone, I'm Linda Loveland. If feeding your family safe, affordable foods is a priority for you, then join me in saying thanks to the North Carolina farmers who feed us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's say thanks to the farmers who feed your family at #ThankNCFarmers. To learn more about the foods we eat and the farm families who feed us, visit feedthedialoguenc.com. And be sure to thank North Carolina farmers.
We now return to NC Spin.
Each year, the legislature requires the State Board of Education to file a report on charter schools in our state, showing, among other things, racial makeup, test results, and other pertinent data. At the January board meeting, the Department of Public Instruction presented that report for approval before sending it to the legislature, but Lieutenant Governor Dan Forrest balked at the information it contained and asked that it be postponed because it didn't have a lot of positive things to say about charters. In contrast with public schools, the report showed that 57% of charter school students were white and wealthier. Howard Forrest says the Department of Public Instruction has an anti-charter bias. Is there a feeling of competition, you think, between charters and traditional K-12 public schools?
Well, I certainly think they're certainly looking at the same populations, and there's some resentment within the public schools toward charters because obviously funds are being taken out of the schools. But I don't know that the report that has been referenced is all that bad. I think we talk about how we want to present the image of charter schools when we really ought to be looking at the data. And there are some very successful charter schools that I think could make a positive story. But I don't see that there has been or continues to be, it has been in the past, but continues to be an anti-charter school sentiment on the Board of Education.
Doug, this story just keeps having legs. Earlier this week, the Charter School Advisory Board asked for the report to be revised before it was sent for the legislature and emphasized more positive facts about charter schools while explaining some of the technical issues with the data that was included. What's your reaction to that?
Well, and I haven't talked to Lieutenant Governor Forrest about this, but when the story initially broke and I read about it and then did a little research on it, this is what I think it was more about. It wasn't so much that the data, it was the way it was presented. And immediately a lot of the headlines were the racial makeup of the schools. Actually, the minority, the African American makeup, percentage-wise, is exactly where it is statewide. But it's just that we have groupings of schools that are overwhelmingly black, overwhelmingly white. It is. It's exactly.
Well, the data I've
The fundamental problem was, and I think that Lieutenant Governor Forrest was right to object to how the data were presented on two matters. One of them was the racial thing. You referenced it, Tom. You noted that charter schools on average are more white than the general district-run public schools, but they're also more black.
But what they're missing is the Hispanics.
It's all about
the Hispanics are not there.
And so you might say, well, interestingly, maybe this data tell us that Hispanic students, maybe families that are Spanish-speaking, are not connecting with charter schools the way others are. That'd be interesting, but it was skewed in a way. Now, the other issue, which is more complicated, has to do with poverty. Are charter school students higher or lower in poverty than traditional? That's hard to know because lots of charter schools don't participate in the free and reduced lunch program, which is how we traditionally measure it. So those, what they ended up with in an amended report was fine. It had information in it that gives people good sense of how charter schools are going. I think the initial report was poorly drafted.
But Chris, I did find it interesting that this Charter School Advisory Board said that we should start off with the positive things about charter schools before we got to the negative. Well, shouldn't that same yardstick be applied to public schools?
Well, this whole thing to me, one of the reasons we're talking about it is Lieutenant Governor Dan Forrest is Lieutenant Governor. Lieutenant Governor Dan Forrest wants to get publicity. This is a good way to do it. Nobody would hardly be talking about this.
Yeah, you just mentioned his name 3 times in 5 seconds.
And that's right. That's exactly right. I went back and read the report. It's a 30-page report. It just lists all the facts. You can quibble with how it's collected or how it's presented. It wasn't presented negatively or positively. It was a list of data points, a list of explanations of so many charter schools got an A, so many charter schools got an F. It was very vanilla, very milquetoast. We would not be talking about it at all. I didn't think it was offensive. I didn't think it presented it negatively or positively. What it did was give Lieutenant Governor Forrest a chance to go on WRAL once or twice and us talk about him in a whole segment here and rally the charter school community behind him politically. That's what this is all about. We can debate charter schools all we want. This is more about politics and him trying to get his name out there. The report was fine. It's always fine. You can, if you love charter schools, you can find something in there. If you don't like it, you can find something in there. This thing has been completely blown out of proportion.
Howard, you were around in the Senate when charter schools were first authorized back in 1996, and chairman of the State Board of Education as they were initiated and evolved and so forth like that. One of the things that came up in this last session of the General Assembly is that many felt like that the legislature sort of lowered the bar on performance. I mean, we gave charters more flexibility, but we also held them to the same kind of accountability that we held to traditional public schools. There's some feel like we relaxed the requirements for accountability this past session in the General Assembly. You agree with that?
I don't see that. I certainly have not studied as close as I would like to, but I think we need to recognize that there are some very successful charter schools in the state. I'm a very strong charter school advocate, but also am an advocate for charter schools that don't work to certainly be closed down. We can't close down public schools, and I would like to close down some of them as well. I think we need to stop focusing on the fluff and thinking about how we look and start focusing on the substance of whether or not we're actually achieving what we want to achieve in the way of educating kids.
In the end of the day, Doug, isn't this kind of a distraction from what we ought to really be thinking about and talking about, and that is whether we're delivering the quality of education we ought to be delivering, the sound basic education our Constitution requires?
Absolutely. And as I said, when I was trying to get the facts on it, I had to dig a lot to get to the facts because there was just a lot of hyperbole out there. You're exactly right.
All right, after these messages, we're going to talk about additional but insufficient transportation funding.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
I still believe in the Constitution. That's why I back Buck.
I believe in the Second Amendment. That's why I back Buck.
I want someone who puts North Carolina first. That's why I back Buck.
In the upcoming Republican primary, back Buck. Buck Newton for Attorney General.
Jobs are disappearing, our population is getting older, and big disruptions lie ahead. How can North Carolina prepare today to create enough good jobs tomorrow? Find solutions at the 31st Annual Emerging Issues Forum, Future Work, February 8th and 9th in Raleigh. Register now at emergingissues.org.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception. keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
It's a fact. Patients who receive care in the medical home from a trusted family physician reduce healthcare costs through prevention, early detection, and affordable management of high-cost chronic diseases.
Every dollar invested in healthcare matters. Let's invest them wisely. Building on North Carolina's medical home model, better health begins with a medical home, a trusted family physician, the best return on our healthcare investment. Learn about the importance of medical homes at ournchealthcare.com.
You sleep on concrete till your body get immune to concrete.
My mom got my brother and I up and said, come on, we're leaving.
I became homeless in the beginning of this year.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, our house caught fire.
I used to see my brother. If he see me, he'd turn and go the other direction.
We did the only thing that we could think of, and we went to a Salvation Army shelter.
You know, we don't have this, like, what's your background look like? We just say, what do you need?
I remember the man from the Salvation Army coming down with a box of clothes.
The Salvation Army officer bought my brother and I an ice cream cone.
Last week, my brother walked up to me, and he just started a conversation.
Today I've given my life to the Salvation Army because I remember what somebody did for me, my brother, and my mom over 30 years ago.
The Salvation Army for me means hope.
Compassion.
Family.
Support.
The good news is there's more money with which to build roads. The bad news is these increased funds aren't nearly enough to keep up with the demand. Starting this month, you're going to notice an increase of approximately 30% in the fees you pay the Department of Motor Vehicles. Even as prices at the gas pump are dropping precipitously, our gas taxes are not dropping proportionately. And last year's legislature stopped the long practice of transferring $200 million from highway funds to the state general fund. Doug, the Board of Transportation recently accelerated projects in the Transportation Improvement Program, saying they should have about $1.7 billion more for projects between now and 2025. But a 2012 study showed the need for an additional $32 billion to meet our growing needs. Governor McCrory says we're going to need a transportation bond referendum. Do you agree? And why didn't the legislature act on it this past session?
Let me go with why the legislature didn't. I think they took an approach that maintenance had been a serious problem that needed addressing before overall new projects, and they've done so. They've had a 12-year plan, which is fascinating. I know too much about asphalt. That's actually the average life expectancy of asphalt in North Carolina is 12 years, so that's part of the reasons why they have a 12-year maintenance plan on the roads. But here's another point that I've heard said that to me makes a lot of sense. Let's say that big number you said there, 20 million, whatever, billion, whatever it is, 32 billion. Let's say they say, okay, here it is. North Carolina does not have the construction company infrastructure to do that amount that quickly. Now, of course, they'd go out and hire more people and hire equipment. That's great. But when you condense it in such a small amount of time, they're going to have to charge very high prices to do that, because it's not like a 10 or 12-year plan where they can factor in the depreciation on their equipment and things of that nature. It makes much more sense to do it in a longer, more structured time.
Okay, but I go back to the question, Howard. The legislature, especially the Senate, didn't want to hear anything about putting an additional $1 billion on to the voters in this bond referendum that we're going to be passing, or supposedly passing in March. Why?
I don't know. I didn't quite understand that. I think it was so unfortunate that the Senate seemed to have taken a position of not being progressive and proactive, but just kind of holding the line. I don't know whether it's because they were upset at the governor or they were trying to take it out on somebody else, but I think that was so short-sighted, and I really think that going down the road, we really need to take another look at this.
You know, we've been talking about this same problem for the whole 18 years NC Spin's been on the air.
Yes.
About transportation funding. And yet, even as we acknowledge the fact that it is insufficient, our leaders have not been willing to take any positive action.
Well, I disagree with that entire analysis. That's not what happened in 2015. The governor sought...
It's $440 million a year in additional million dollars.
What they did in 2015 is dramatically increase highway funding, $500 million a year, every year. So if you were to issue a $1.5 billion bond, as the governor originally proposed for roads, what the legislature did instead is, okay, instead of borrowing 1.5 and paying it back, we will over the next 3 years spend that amount of money in cash. Now,
Yeah,
that's
but Chris,
not
that's a drop in the bucket for what we
underinvestment.
need, isn't it?
Well, we have talked about this. It's interesting that NC Spin has been on the air longer than the lifespan of asphalt. I think it's important to get that out front.
That may be the fact of the night.
That might be the fact of the night. But
maybe too long.
But no, it is interesting that we've talked about this forever, and the legislature did free up some new money for the highway construction, but nowhere near enough. And the question is, how are we going to pay for it? We took action on the gas tax to stop the increase in the gas tax. But we raise fees on DMV, so we're actually raising money. It's in effect, people are paying more to drive their car because you have to go through DMV to drive their car. At some point, we're going to have to come up with a funding mechanism that's not the gas tax, or we're going to have to have.
And we're going to have to find the leadership.
And nobody wants to talk about it.
We're going to have to find the leadership willing to do it. Well, after these messages, we're going to ask our panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Hey everyone, I'm Linda Loveland. If feeding your family safe, affordable foods is a priority for you, then join me in saying thanks to the North Carolina farmers who feed us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Let's say thanks to the farmers who feed your family at #ThankNCFarmers. To learn more about the foods we eat and the farm families who feed us, visit feedthedialoguenc.com. And be sure to thank North Carolina farmers.
Clean transportation options can help you fuel what matters.
We're fueling what matters to us by converting our fleet of collection trucks over to compressed natural gas. It's a good, smart business decision, and having the air cleaner is something that benefits all the families that work with us.
We use biodiesel in our heavy equipment. We've got propane in a lot of our police cars, and we've really embraced the electric car. Join the city of Raleigh and fuel what matters.
To learn how you can fuel what matters, visit fuelwhatmatters.org.
Phones are getting smarter, cars more efficient, TVs bigger and more stunning. Imagine the same innovation from agriculture. Meet the Plant Sciences Initiative at NC State, a proposed state-of-the-art research complex where world-class researchers will tackle agriculture's toughest challenges, like feeding the world's rapidly growing population while preserving natural resources for future generations. Join Farm Bureau and NC State in moving North Carolina to the forefront of ag research in the world. Visit keepaggrowing.org.
Well, we're running out of time, so we don't have time to go around and ask all the panel to tell us something we don't know. But here is the question I think we would like to know. The North Carolina bond referendum, $1 billion bond referendum, is going to be on the ballot March 15th. I want to ask the panel their consensus. Will it pass?
$2 billion bond
$2 billion,
package. I think it'll pass. There is some opposition, but I don't think it's well funded enough.
Howard?
I think it will pass, and I believe people are hungry for that.
A while back I said it wouldn't, but I learned a lesson from the guy to the left of me here. When a bond doesn't have strong opposition, it usually passes. I think it'll pass.
John is not to the left of anybody, number one. I think it will be a lot closer than we're thinking because of if Cruz and Trump are the main candidates in the Republican primary. If it's a two-person race, Trump and Cruz, I think the bond issue will be very close.
Well, and it all sort of boils down to who shows up at the polls to vote on March 15th. Right. Is there any strong evidence that Democrats have a lot of motivation to show up to the polls?
Well, not at the moment, but we might still have a Democratic primary by then.
We might. We'll see what happens in Iowa and New Hampshire. That's right.
Yeah. So again, people in the know tell me that it's mighty quiet out there. That people in general in North Carolina don't know about the bond referendum. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column. Be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.